British war dramas of the 1970s weren't polished flag-waving spectacles. They were messy, cynical, and often brutally honest about the cost of empire and the folly of generals. They questioned the myths audiences had grown comfortable with. But here's the twist. Most of them have been completely forgotten, buried under Hollywood blockbusters and endless reruns of The Great Escape. Why did these daring films vanish from memory? And what secrets do they still hold for viewers willing to dig them up? The Eagle has landed 1976. Imagine a film where the heroes aren't British soldiers or American GIs, but German commandos on a secret mission to kidnap Winston Churchill. That's the bold gamble of The Eagle has landed, directed by John Sturges. Michael Caine plays Colonel Steiner, a professional German officer whose mission isn't motivated by ideology, but by duty. Donald Sutherland shows up as an Irish radical recruited to assist, bringing an odd but magnetic energy to the film. The movie dared to make Nazi paratroopers sympathetic, at least on a human level, which immediately rubbed audiences the wrong way. While it did solid business at the box office, critics accused it of glamorizing the enemy. Yet beneath the controversy lies a tightly wound thriller. Shot in English villages standing in for the countryside near Churchill's residence, the film combines the crisp tension of espionage with the chaos of battlefield action. The cast is stacked with heavyweight British talent, including Anthony Quayle and Donald Pleasance, who chew through their roles with relish. But what really makes it unforgettable is the moral ambiguity. Instead of simple good versus evil storytelling, we get weary men trapped in a mission they know is doomed. By the time the bullets start flying, sympathy shifts in unexpected directions. It's a reminder that British cinema in the 1970s wasn't afraid to provoke, even if it meant upsetting patriotic audiences. Today it deserves recognition as one of the most daring war dramas of the decade. A Bridge Too Far, 1977. How do you follow the massive success of The Longest Day? You go bigger, risk everything, and film a sprawling 3-hour epic about a military disaster. Richard Attenborough's A Bridge Too Far attempted just that, dramatizing the failed Operation Market Garden of 1944. The cast list reads like a who's who of 70s cinema. Sean Connery, Michael Caine, Anthony Hopkins, Laurence Olivier, and Dirk Bogarde, to name a few. On paper, it should have been untouchable, but audiences were not ready for a story where Allied troops, instead of storming heroically to victory, were bogged down, misled by poor planning, and crushed under German counterattacks. The film doesn't sugarcoat the arrogance of commanders or the brutal losses of ordinary soldiers. Massive set pieces recreate the paratrooper drops, with thousands of extras parachuting in real stunts rather than special effects. The level of authenticity is staggering. Whole Dutch towns were reconstructed for the battle sequences. Yet, despite the scale and the talent, critics were divided. Some admired its honesty, while others found it too long, too bleak, and too blunt in its criticism of Allied leadership. It failed to become the classic it aimed to be, overshadowed by slicker American productions. But look closer, and it's clear this was a groundbreaking war drama that dared to show the Allies stumbling, bleeding, and even retreating. In the Britain of the 1970s, where nostalgia for wartime heroism was still strong, that honesty was too much to handle, which is exactly why it feels so fresh today. The Seawolves, 1978. Think about this. A group of retired, aging British officers dusting off their uniforms for one last mission behind enemy lines. That's the premise of The Seawolves, based on a true story from 1943. Gregory Peck, David Niven, and Trevor Howard star as members of a ragtag unit of veterans tasked with destroying German supply ships hiding in neutral Goa, India. It sounds almost like fantasy, but it really happened. Director Andrew V. McLaglen leaned hard into the old-school charm of his cast, showing men past their prime, proving they still had the courage to act. The mission was codenamed Operation Creek, and its secrecy was vital because it violated international neutrality. The film captures both the absurdity and the danger of throwing older men into a desperate commando raid. With their wrinkles and slower steps, these characters are far removed from the youthful soldiers of traditional war films. And that's exactly what makes it so compelling. The production was ambitious, filmed in India with cooperation from the Indian Navy, giving the sea battles an authentic backdrop. Yet, it never found the same lasting fame as other wartime adventures. Maybe audiences didn't want to watch elderly actors reliving glory days, or maybe the mix of real history with lighthearted camaraderie felt uneven. Still, the story of gentlemen warriors sneaking into enemy waters to change the tide of war is pure British eccentricity at its finest. Forgotten by most, The Seawolves is both a war drama and a sly commentary on age, pride, and duty. Operation Daybreak, 1975. Some war films focus on big battles, others zoom in on a single act of courage. Operation Daybreak is firmly in the second camp, recounting the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, the infamous Nazi official known as the Butcher of Prague. The mission, carried out by Czech agents trained in Britain's Special Operations Executive, was one of the most daring and costly resistance operations of the war. Directed by Lewis Gilbert, the film was shot on location in Prague, giving it a haunting authenticity. The city streets, still scarred by war decades later, create a chilling backdrop. Timothy Bottoms, Anthony Andrews, and Martin Shaw star as the Czech parachutists, portraying men who know they're walking into a death trap. Unlike Hollywood versions of similar stories, there's no triumphant escape here. The film emphasizes the psychological weight of sacrifice as the agents face betrayal, brutal reprisals, and an inevitable end inside a Prague church during a bloody siege. The production was daring, considering how recent the wounds of occupation were in Czechoslovakia. Extras included locals who had lived through Nazi terror, lending the film an uncomfortable edge of realism. Critics admired its honesty, but noted that it lacked the glamour audiences expected from war cinema. Box office numbers were poor, and it faded from memory. Yet today, it stands as a powerful reminder of how war films can strip away romantic illusions and force us to confront the true cost of resistance. Operation Daybreak isn't a rousing adventure, it's a dirge, and that's what makes it unforgettable. The Last Valley, 1971. What happens when you strip war of its politics and boil it down to nothing but survival? The Last Valley asked that question in 1971, dragging audiences back not to World War II, but to the brutality of the 30 Years' War in 17th century Europe. Michael Caine and Omar Sharif star as mercenary leaders who stumble upon a peaceful valley untouched by the conflict raging all around. For a brief moment, it seems like a refuge, but greed, suspicion, and violence inevitably follow. Director James Clavell, best known for Shogun, crafted a bleak, atmospheric film that feels more like a philosophical parable than a straightforward war story. Shot in Austria's Tyrolean Alps, the locations give the drama a haunting beauty. Snowbound villages and misty forests become battlefields where morality is as shifting as the weather. Caine delivers one of his coldest performances, a hardened captain who views war as a trade, not a calling. Sharif counters him with quiet intensity as a scholar-turned-soldier, desperate to preserve some shred of humanity. Audiences didn't know what to make of it. Too grim for mainstream viewers, too strange for traditional war film fans, and far too expensive for its returns, it bombed at the box office. But the themes it explored, civilians caught between armies, the illusion of neutrality, the futility of idealism, were decades ahead of their time. It's not a film of glory or triumph, but of decay and despair. Forgotten by history, The Last Valley remains one of the boldest British attempts to redefine what a war drama could be. Young Winston, 1972. Before Gary Oldman's Oscar-winning performance in Darkest Hour, Richard Attenborough took a swing at telling Winston Churchill's origin story in Young Winston. But instead of a weary wartime leader, we get a brash, insecure, and ambitious young man trying to prove himself on the battlefield. Simon Ward plays Churchill in his youth, dramatizing his experiences as a cavalry officer in the Sudan and as a war correspondent during the Boer War. What makes this film stand out is how unflattering it dares to be. Churchill isn't portrayed as a fully formed genius, but as an insecure figure desperate for recognition, sometimes reckless to the point of arrogance. The desert battle sequences in Sudan, filmed with hundreds of extras and real cavalry charges, give the film a grand sweep. Attenborough, always a perfectionist, insisted on recreating the famous charge at Omdurman with historical precision, even down to the uniforms and Sudanese fighters. The production value was staggering, yet it was met with lukewarm reception. Critics praised Ward's effort but felt the film lacked a strong emotional core. Ironically, Churchill himself had published his own account of these adventures in My Early Life, which the film adapts faithfully, perhaps too faithfully. The result is part war drama, part political biography, neither of which fully clicked with 1970s audiences. Still, as a window into how Britain wanted to remember its most famous statesman during a decade of political turmoil, young Winston is fascinating. It shows that even Churchill's legend wasn't immune to doubt, criticism, and the awkwardness of youthful failure. Forgotten today, it remains a curious portrait of the man before the cigar smoke and VO for victory salutes. The Blockhouse, 1973. Peter Sellers built his career on comedy, but The Blockhouse is one of the rare times he stripped away the jokes to deliver a devastatingly serious performance. Based on a true story, the film follows a group of prisoners, French, British, and others, trapped underground in a German supply bunker after an air raid in 1944. Buried alive with food and wine, but no way out, they endure months of claustrophobic survival, slowly succumbing to despair. Sellers plays Rouquet, one of the men, in a role so subdued and haunting it shocked critics. Gone are the exaggerated mannerisms of Inspector Clouseau. This is Sellers at his most vulnerable. The entire film takes place in suffocating darkness, with characters lit only by torches and dwindling lamps. The set itself was a nightmare for the cast, forcing them to work in genuinely tight, airless conditions. The story is less about combat than about the psychological unraveling of men facing a slow, inevitable death. Some give in to hopelessness, some cling to faith and rescue, and others simply fade into silence. The final scenes, almost unbearably bleak, make this one of the most harrowing British war dramas ever produced. Audiences didn't want this kind of war story in 1973. It was too grim, too art house, and far too depressing for a public raised on tales of daring escapes. The Blockhouse quickly disappeared from cinemas, never finding a broad audience. But in hindsight, it may be Peter Sellers' most underrated performance and one of Britain's starkest explorations of war's human cost. Conduct Unbecoming, 1975. Not all war dramas focus on the front lines. Conduct Unbecoming dives into the rot within the British Army itself. Set not in Europe, but in colonial India, the film centers on a military courtroom trial where a young officer is accused of attacking a woman within the regiment's social circle. Christopher Plummer, Michael York, and James Faulkner lead the cast in a story about honor, corruption, and the suffocating power of tradition. The film is adapted from a stage play, and it shows in its dialogue-heavy scenes, but what it lacks in spectacle, it makes up for in raw tension. Behind the courtroom drama lurks the deeper critique, the British military's rigid class structure, and its obsession with protecting the institution at all costs. The dusty garrisons and opulent colonial halls create a striking contrast, underlining how far removed officers were from the soldiers and civilians caught in the Empire's grip. Critics at the time were uneasy. Some dismissed it as too talky, while others recognized its boldness in tackling corruption inside the military. The war backdrop is almost secondary, but its themes cut to the heart of why empires eventually crumble. Unlike the straightforward heroism of many war films, Conduct Unbecoming exposes the hypocrisy and moral failings of the very institution meant to defend honor. Because it doesn't offer big battles or epic spectacle, it slipped quickly into obscurity. But for anyone interested in the darker, more institutional side of military life, it's one of the most thought-provoking British dramas of the 1970s. Overlord, 1975. Few war films are as hauntingly unique as Overlord, directed by Stuart Cooper, shot in black and white. It blends archival World War II footage with the fictional story of a young British soldier preparing for D-Day. The result feels like a ghostly documentary where reality and fiction blur into a single, chilling vision of war. The protagonist, played by Brian Sterner, isn't a hardened hero. He's just an ordinary recruit swept into the machinery of war. We watch his training, his friendships, and his quiet reflections, all intercut with real footage from the Imperial War Museum archives. When the narrative reaches the invasion, it feels inevitable, almost predetermined, as if history itself has already claimed him. The film was praised by critics like Stanley Kubrick, who called it one of the most authentic war films ever made. Yet, audiences barely noticed. Maybe it was the black and white style. Maybe its refusal to glorify combat. But Overlord vanished quickly after release. For decades, it was screened mostly in art houses and film societies until Criterion revived it decades later. What makes Overlord unforgettable is its mood. It isn't loud or triumphant. It's quiet, fatalistic, and deeply human. The intercutting of archival footage with fictional drama creates an unsettling realism that most war films avoid. If war cinema is often about myth-making, Overlord is about inevitability and loss. Forgotten by the mainstream, it deserves recognition as one of Britain's most daring cinematic experiments. Zulu Dawn, 1979. How do you follow one of the most beloved British war films ever made, with a prequel that dares to show the British Army's greatest humiliation? Zulu Dawn, released in 1979, recounts the Battle of Isandlwana, where Zulu warriors annihilated a modern British force in 1879. The cast is stacked with heavyweights: Burt Lancaster, Peter O'Toole, Simon Ward, and John Mills. The film doesn't skimp on scale either, employing thousands of extras to recreate the sweeping battle scenes in South Africa. The Zulu warriors are depicted with dignity and ferocity, while the British officers come across as arrogant and fatally overconfident. Director Douglas Hickox leaned into authenticity, consulting historians to get uniforms, weapons, and tactics right. But here's the problem. Audiences didn't want their image of British imperial might tarnished. The film bombed at the box office, criticized for being too slow in the build-up and too brutal in its finale. Unlike the triumphant defense of Rorke's Drift in Zulu, 1964, this film offers no redemption. The army is destroyed, the survivors broken, and the myth of invincibility shattered. In many ways, that's why it's so important. Zulu Dawn confronts the arrogance of empire and the price of underestimating indigenous resistance. It might lack the elegance of its predecessor, but it tells a story rarely acknowledged in popular culture. Today it feels like one of the most honest depictions of colonial warfare Britain ever produced, even if it was too bitter for audiences of its time. Shout at the Devil, 1976. If you thought war dramas were all stiff uniforms and solemn speeches, Shout at the Devil proves otherwise. Based on Wilbur Smith's novel, this film throws Lee Marvin and Roger Moore together in a World War I tale set in East Africa. Marvin plays an American adventurer, loud, drunk, and reckless, while Moore is his polished British partner. Together, they set out on a wild scheme to destroy a German warship menacing the coast. What sets the film apart is its sheer chaos. It swings between raucous comedy, violent war action, and tragic melodrama. One minute, you're watching Marvin brawl his way through a bar, and the next, you're staring at a battlefield drenched in blood. Director Peter Hunt, best known for his work on James Bond, didn't quite balance these tones, and critics shredded it for being inconsistent. But dig beneath the uneven pacing, and there's a fascinating story of colonial-era conflict rarely shown on screen. Filmed in South Africa, the production captured wide African landscapes rarely seen in British war cinema of the time. Marvin, famously unpredictable off-camera, gave the shoot an edge of unpredictability, while Moore tried to keep things polished and charming. Audiences didn't know what to make of it, and the film quickly sank. Yet, in its mix of absurdity, violence, and colonial politics, Shout at the Devil is a strange time capsule. It's messy, sure, but in a way that feels more honest than polished heroics. Forgotten today, it's worth rediscovering just to see war cinema at its most unhinged. The Passage, 1979. Some war dramas are forgotten because they were quiet or subtle. The Passage is forgotten because it was brutal. Released in 1979, it stars Anthony Quinn as a Basque shepherd tasked with smuggling a scientist across Nazi-occupied France. Christopher Lee delivers a chilling performance as a sadistic SS officer on their trail. The film pulls no punches. Snowbound Pyrenees landscapes set the stage for a grim chase, with civilians and soldiers alike caught in the crossfire. The tone is relentless, offering little relief from the cruelty of occupation. Director J. Lee Thompson, known for The Guns of Navarone, aimed for a gritty survival thriller, but ended up with something bleaker than audiences expected. Despite its strong cast, including James Mason and Malcolm McDowell, the film bombed with critics. They found it too violent, too joyless, and too far removed from the rousing wartime narratives people still associated with the genre. It was quickly buried, left out of the canon of British war dramas. Yet, for all its flaws, The Passage deserves a second look. Its stark winter settings and moral ambiguities reflect a late 70s mood, where optimism was gone and only survival mattered. It's not pretty, it's not inspiring, but it is a fascinating snapshot of how Britain tried to tell war stories at the very end of the decade. The Sea Shall Not Have Them, 1970. Originally released in 1954, The Sea Shall Not Have Them was a World War II rescue drama about RAF airmen stranded in the North Sea. By the 1970s, it resurfaced in television syndication, repackaged as part of Britain's endless appetite for war programming. For a new generation, this became a fresh 70s war film, even though it was a relic of the past. The film stars Michael Redgrave and Dirk Bogarde, delivering tense performances as officers coordinating the desperate search. What kept it relevant in the 70s was its claustrophobic suspense, hours ticking away as freezing men clung to survival in a dinghy, while the RAF scoured stormy seas above. Though critics in the 50s had praised its realism, by the time of its 70s revival, it felt dated. No wide desert battles, no daring commando raids, just men versus the sea. That quiet realism didn't resonate in an era of bigger spectacles. As a result, it faded back into obscurity, remembered mainly by those who caught it in late-night TV slots. Still, its inclusion here matters. The Sea Shall Not Have Them's revival in the 70s shows how Britain's war drama cycle wasn't just about new films. It was about how old ones were reshaped, repackaged, and often forgotten again. It's a forgotten classic twice over. So, there you have it. 15 British war dramas from the 1970s that history almost erased. From doomed paratroopers and suffocating bunkers to colonial disasters and grim mountain chases, these films prove Britain was unafraid to confront failure, ambiguity, and the darker edges of war. Which one deserves a full restoration and a primetime return? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more lost cinematic treasures. After all, the past isn't dead. It's just waiting to be rediscovered.